for Maitland.
Okay. Is the clock right? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Temporary Speaker. I rise today to mark National Domestic Violence Remembrance Day to recognise and mourn the scores of women, men and children who have suffered and whose lives have been marred or cut short by domestic violence. Domestic Violence Remembrance Day falls on the first Wednesday of May, which is also known as Domestic and Family Violence Prevention Month in Queensland, but not here. But one day in a month, 1 month in a year, none of these can be enough time to recognise the suffering of thousands of Australians everywhere, every day. And I want to pay a special thank you to Moving Forward, the organisation which organised the memorial flowers that were on the front gates of this Parliament yesterday, which the Leader of the Opposition, who's in the chamber now, and his parliamentary colleagues, including myself, all went down there to show our support for those who are the very most vulnerable people in our community who have lost their lives, and for those who have been left behind to struggle with that loss. It's a mark of how far we have to go as a nation in our handling of domestic violence that we are now only just seeing governments start to dedicate resources to collecting and analysing data on this issue. Earlier this year, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare released its first report on family, domestic and sexual violence in Australia and found that in this country, on average, 1 woman a week and 1 man a month is killed by an intimate partner. It also found that domestic violence cost our country at least $22 billion each year, including healthcare, welfare and lost wages. And it's really important that we talk about this today because we've also seen the release of 2 reports by the Bureau of Crime Statistics, which have talked about the approach of the government to this very important issue. And what those reports have said, and I think it's very important to think about those in the context of a day of mourning for people who have lost their lives to domestic violence. And that is, in 2014, the government cut $20 million out of the women's refuge sector, redirected funding to general homelessness services, and many refuges around this state were forced to close. Many had to partner up with national large charities which did not have the same level of experience or capacity to assist victims and survivors of domestic violence. Now, that report by Boxar today was talking about the failure of a Safer Pathway, the government's signature program to address domestic violence, and that part of the reason for that is because we have a safer pathway that essentially goes nowhere. The refuges have been cut to the bone. We have very minimal funds for counselling, for case management, and if we do not provide victims and survivors of domestic violence with adequate resources, with adequate accommodation, emergency and crisis accommodation in particular, with wraparound support such as case management and counselling, how can we expect them to find the courage to leave someone who has been emotionally, physically, financially, sexually and psychologically abusing them over a period of some cases many years? The other issue that has been found to be wanting in this government's response in the Boxar reports released today have been the Domestic Violence Safety Assessment Tool, which has been criticised as being highly ineffective in identifying women at serious risk of harm. The tool is unweighted, with extreme violence such as has your partner ever choked, strangled or suffocated you or attempted to do any of these things, which we know are predictors of domestic homicide, being weighted the same as is your partner unemployed. Other states use weighted assessment tools. Other states work collaboratively through Our Watch, the national Commonwealth state mechanism for sharing information for preventing violence against women and their children, and this state is the only state that is not a member of Our Watch. So it is shameful. We are looking to the government to address these issues. We know that the issues with Safer Pathway could have been addressed with more funding. They've had a 100% increase since the program started, with a 20% increase in funding. It is not good enough. The government brags that it focuses on perpetrators. It's about time they actually started supporting victims and survivors of domestic violence. And on a day when we mourn the dead, they need to actually take action.
Call the member.